But now that there's a hot war in the Middle East, does that change the calculus?
What is the point? We already know that they have nukes. If the United States forces them to cough up the fur ball, how is that in the interest of the United States? I just don't. I'm sure there's some point. I just don't know what the point is. Can anybody explain to me how does it? It seems to me it's just another attempt to for the left wing of my party to throw a rock at Israel.
All right. So last night, CNN's commentator Van Jones argued that there would be no point for Israel to disclose that it has a clandestine nuclear program, is not part of the non-proliferation treaty, and pretends to be a victim endlessly, even though they literally have nuclear weapons that guarantees that whether they have a right to exist or not, they will exist because they have nukes. Now, I appreciate that Abby Phillip there pushed back a little bit, but let's talk about this in more detail. So first, let's explain some of the context here. On Monday, 30 House Democrats urged the Trump administration to do the right thing, which means he won't do it, and basically stand against Israel by acknowledging that Israel has a nuclear program. Now, for all of the hatred that some on the left want to direct at former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, you do have to give her credit for the fact that she stood on the House floor and gave a speech where she repeatedly drew attention to Israel's clandestine nuclear program. And I really appreciated that. Because while I know about the clandestine nuclear program, most Americans don't know. Most on the right certainly didn't know, because it's something that's been concealed from the American public. I mean, there's reports about it, but you really have to do some digging. It's not like something that comes up in every article where Israel is fear-mongering about Iran's nuclear weapons, which don't even exist. See, if you're doing accurate journalism, every single time you're quoting an Israeli fear-mongering about Iran, you would also mention that Israel has nuclear weapons, but they don't. So I appreciated that Marjorie Taylor Greene informed the general public about the reality of the situation. But anyway, specifically going back to the Democrats, the 30 House Democrats who are urging Trump to acknowledge Israel's nuclear arsenal, they write a letter and it reads in part, "We are, in the fullest sense, fighting this war side by side with a country whose potential nuclear weapons program the United States government officially refuses to acknowledge. The risks of miscalculation, escalation, and nuclear use in this environment are not theoretical." They certainly are not theoretical, and I'm gonna prove that to you in just a moment. A 1974 Special National Intelligence Estimate, a formal consensus assessment of the entire US intelligence community, including the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, concluded that Israel already has produced nuclear weapons. The document was classified top secret for nearly 32 years before being declassified and released in 2008. And then finally, they end their letter by simply saying, "We ask you, President Trump, to hold Israel to the same standard of transparency that the United States expects from any other country that may be pushing, or pursuing, I should say, that may be pursuing or retaining nuclear weapons capability." Now, with that in mind, let's turn to the CNN panel, which was discussing this topic. Now, before Van Jones made his case, presidential historian Tim Naftali explained the history of Israel's nuclear program. Let's take a look at that.
Some people out there might not know this, but the United States government tried really hard to prevent Israel from having nuclear weapons. It was not in the state and national interests of the United States under the administrations of Dwight Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson for Israel to have the bomb. The French engaged in a covert operation with Israel to help Israel build its capacity. The French were not straightforward with us about it, and the Israelis were not straightforward with us. By the end of the 60s, you have a new administration that comes into town, And the Israelis, the French have changed their policy and they're now not selling weapons to Israel anymore. The Israelis come to our government and say, we'd like to buy F-4s, Phantom bombers. We're willing to do that, but we say to the Israelis, but you've got to announce that you will never introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East. And we were afraid that if the Israelis announced that they had nuclear weapons, the Egyptians would go to the Soviets and say, would you give us a nuclear guarantee? And we'd find ourselves in a Cuban Missile Crisis, but in the Middle East. So the Nixon administration, which by the way, the Joint Chiefs of Staff didn't want Israel to have nuclear weapons. State Department didn't want them. Really, none of the leaders in that administration wanted them to have nuclear weapons, but they had them. And so the US government came up with this fix, which is basically don't say to the world that you have them, and don't introduce them. In other words, don't assemble a weapon, and we'll sell you Phantoms, because the administration was afraid that if they didn't sell Phantoms to Israel, members of Congress who were supportive of Israel would say, why aren't you helping the Israelis out? And the US government didn't want to say, well, we're not helping them because they have nuclear weapons.
Okay, they have nuclear weapons. Okay, they have nuclear weapons. They stole nuclear secrets. They stole enriched uranium. Okay, that's what happened. That's what Israel did. And for whatever reason, Van Jones doesn't think it's a big deal. You know, it's a clandestine nuclear program based on stolen enriched uranium from the United States, or stolen materials from the United States, stolen secrets from the United States. That is the reality of the situation. Van Jones couldn't care less, apparently. Gee, I wonder why. Okay, so he did get a little bit of pushback from Abby Phillip, which you saw in the earlier video, and I want you to look at a longer version of that clip. Take a look.
I mean, we do. Look.
Is there? I'm asking an honest question. Why? I mean, has there been some rumor that says that Israel is going to nuke Iran?
Here's the thing. I guess the question is again, now there's been a change of status quo. Mm-hmm. There's a war between the United States, Israel, and Iran that is going on right now in the Middle East. And under those circumstances, that is actually different from what we've been experiencing for the last, 40, 50 years. And so under those circumstances, there's only one power in the Middle East that has a nuke, and it's Israel. And so the question is, what are the circumstances? What are the boundaries? Are there any boundaries? They don't acknowledge that they have them.
I appreciate her saying that, because it's true. I mean, it needs to be said. And so he doesn't think it's that big of a deal. Now, I think it's a big deal. I think it's a huge deal, and I want to explain why. We've already been threatened with Israel's nuclear weapons. You heard me right, I just said that. Israel has, or at least figures in Israel, have threatened to use nuclear weapons against us if we don't give them what they want. Now that would be a big mistake, okay? And the whole thing about nuclear weapons is when you're threatening another nuclear power, you are egging on mutually assured destruction. Let's be clear about that. So stupid move. But when we talk about the threat, it's coming from a stupid person. And I'm talking about Jonathan Pollard, notorious traitor to the United States, a US-born former CIA official who betrayed the United States by providing US secrets to the Israelis. He got caught doing that and went to prison for it. Unfortunately, during the Obama administration, he was offered parole. This was, I believe, in 2015. Big mistake. He should have never been released from prison. He should have rotted there. He should have died there. I would have wanted a punishment even worse than that, but okay, life in prison, it would suffice. He was a traitor to our country. He sold our secrets to the Israelis, and then the Israelis, at the time, we were enemies with the Soviets. They provided our secrets to the Soviets. I mean, just treacherous behavior. But anyway, Obama offered him parole, in 2015. It was like a humanitarian thing. I guess he had fallen ill in prison where he deserved to die. But then later, Trump, in his first administration, allowed him to fly back to Israel. And that's exactly what Jonathan Pollard did. He flew back to Israel. I shouldn't even say back to Israel. He wasn't born in Israel, he was born in the United States. But he flew to Israel to safety with the people he actually cares about, the country he actually cares about. And he did so on the Adelson jet. So he got to fly to Israel in class, right? And then what did he do after that? I'll give you a little taste. This is a video of Jonathan Pollard speaking to Israeli media and bragging about threatening the United States with Israel's nuclear weapons. Let's take a look.
Well, I believe that the Biden administration, as I called it, did threaten us. But I said, you're mistaken if you think there's never a choice. There was a choice. He said, well, what? Is it to have our weapons cut off? I said, no, let me bring you back to October 1973 during the Yom Kippur War when Henry Kissinger instituted an arms embargo against us. He stopped the aerial resupply of our army at that point to extract diplomatic concessions from us. And what happened? What happened was an A-4 Skyhawk was parked at Tel Nof Air Base with some interesting weapons under its wings. And we told the Americans, take your eye in the sky and take a good look at the airplane that's on that runway. And the next day, the airlift started. So the guy that I was talking...
Which airlift?
To Israel. The arms air.
So in other words, we threatened their...
We threatened to use unconventional weapons. I'll leave it at that.
Threatened to use nukes. By the way, Biden threatened the Israelis. Are you kidding me? Well, what did Biden threaten the Israelis with? Oh, we're gonna withhold some of the bombs that we've been providing to you because it looks bad that we're providing the bombs that you're dropping on children's heads in Gaza? Is that what? Oh, that's deserving of a nuclear threat? That's our ally. That's our ally. So you guys understand why I'm so heated about and passionate about how I think Jonathan Pollard should have rotted and died in prison? By the way, he's making a political run in Israel as we speak. I don't know if he's running for prime minister. I saw a headline about it, but imagine Jonathan Pollard, US-born traitor to the United States, now serving as Israel's prime minister. And considering, the trend that we've been seeing for decades now, where our government pleasures Israel regardless of who's in charge, that'll be a real bad day in America if he wins and our government is deferential to a guy who is a convicted traitor to the US. Anyway, so yeah, to Van Jones, it does matter. It does matter. And so with all that information that I've just given you, I wanna go back to the very first video we played and I wanna watch it again. And I want you to hear what Van Jones said to Abby Phillip as she made her case for informing or pressuring the Israelis to acknowledge that they have nuclear weapons in the first place. Take a look.
But now that there's a hot war in the Middle East, does that change the calculus?
What is the point? We already know that they have nukes. If the United States forces them to cough up the fur ball, how is that in the interest of the United States? I'm sure there's some point. I just don't know what the point is. Can anybody explain to me how does it? It seems to me it's just another attempt for the left wing of my party to throw a rock at Israel.
Is that what it is? It's just, the people to the left of you, Van Jones, those wacky radicals who are calling for this, calling for Israel to acknowledge that they have nuclear weapons, those radicals who are concerned about a traitor to the United States threatening to use Israel's clandestine nuclear arsenal against the US. Only radicals are worried about that? What a clown, what an embarrassment. I hope the money's worth it, man. I hope the money's worth it. Dude was freaking making jokes about dead kids in Gaza not too long ago, and he has the audacity to tell us, oh, this is irrelevant. Oh, so unfair to Israel, asking them to acknowledge their nuclear weapons. Poor Israel. Anyway, going back to Jonathan Pollard real quick, because I have one other thing to say about him, just to give you a sense of how sadistic that piece of crap is. He wants Gazans wiped off the face of the map, and I'm not kidding. In fact, he wants to represent that policy in the Knesset. And Pollard stated the following: I personally prefer the forcible removal of all current residents of Gaza and the annexation of Gaza and its repopulation by us, meaning the Israelis. Last year, US Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, met with Pollard in private, did not inform the White House about it. Our government had no idea, allegedly. And he invited Pollard to the US Embassy. So the US Embassy is considered American soil. So that traitor stepped foot on American soil, met with our ambassador to Israel without anyone in the government knowing about it. And we're supposed to be mad at Tucker Carlson because his line of questioning toward Huckabee was naughty. It was offensive to the Israelis. Good. I hope they're offended every day, all day, because they deserve much worse than that. Anyway, this generated a lot of bad press, but Huckabee still remains in his position. So there we are.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.